Hello, and thank you for watching this Spring Harvest Home talk today. My name is Clare Williams, and I'm a fellow at the Oxford Centre for Christian Apologetics. I'm really glad you've decided to tune in and to listen, because today I'm going to be looking at the question, can't I be good without God? And it's for another talk that I've recorded for Spring Harvest Home on the topic of truth. And I began that talk by commenting on the fact that it's been so encouraging and inspiring to see our communities, our society pull together as we fight the coronavirus. It was on Tuesday, the 24th of March, that the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, addressed the nation and asked for volunteers to support the NHS. To support the NHS with the delivery of medicines to those who are vulnerable, the delivery of shopping, or phoning people just to check up and see that they're okay. And we know that within 24 hours, just 24 hours, over 400,000 people responded to that appeal. And we know that even more people since then have responded, and you may well have signed up too. In the midst of our turmoil, we have seen public displays of gratitude through things like the Clap for the NHS initiative. We've seen children and their families all over the world painting beautiful rainbows and displaying them in their windows as a symbol of hope and to brighten up locked down neighbourhoods. And sadly, we've also seen doctors and nurses who literally look death in the face, fighting day and night to combat the virus and to support those who have been hospitalised. And we collectively honour the courage and the bravery of those who've died because of the virus. And so with such displays of goodwill and community spirit, everyone working together for the common good, regardless of race, regardless of background, regardless of religion, surely this is showing us that we don't need God to be good. Aren't we all, in our very different but nonetheless significant ways, loving our neighbour? And in some ways we could say that non-religious lifestyles are more moral than religious lifestyles. And that's because a person who is not religious will do good deeds just because they want to out of the kindness of their heart, whereas we could say that a religious person does good things because they are either in fear of divine punishment or they're looking for divine reward. As Julian Baggini states, acting morally because it is in one's own best interest to do so does not seem to be acting morally at all. Morality is about acting in the best interest of others and oneself. On their website, Humanist UK write that their aim is to create a tolerant world where rational thinking and kindness prevail, to support lasting change for a better society, championing ideas for the one life we have. And what we're seeing right now in the UK and across the world is a deep sense of kindness without evoking God. We seem to be getting on all right with building a better society, with loving our neighbour. Now, there's a hit Netflix comedy show called The Good Place, and it presents a world, or should I say an afterlife, in which loving your neighbour is literally what makes that world go round. And The Good Place follows the story of Eleanor. She is someone who's died and wakes up, not in heaven, but the good place. And as she becomes conscious of her surroundings, someone called Michael explains to her how and why she got there. He says this: during your time on earth, every one of your actions had either a positive or negative value, depending upon however much good or bad that action put into the universe. Every sandwich you ate, every time you bought a trashy magazine, every single thing you did had an effect that rippled out over time and ultimately created some amount of good or bad. When your time on earth is ended, we calculate the total value of your life, and only the people with the very highest scores, the true cream of the crop, get to come here. As cheesy as this may sound, there's something about Michael's explanation that resonates with our culture. There's an intuitive sense within our culture that is based upon the idea that the more good deeds we do, the more good deeds than bad, makes us a good person. So rather than being accountable to a God, we prefer to be accountable to ourselves. And our actions, in the words of Michael from The Good Place, they add a positive or negative value into the universe. Unlike The Good Place, we may not think that after death there is an afterlife, but we do lean towards the idea in our culture that our actions and not religious belief make us good or bad. Now, the spoiler alert continues because the first episode of The Good Place brings about the revelation that Eleanor doesn't actually belong there. And she doesn't belong there because in her life on earth, she was actually quite a horrible and selfish person. Suddenly, the paradise and perfection of The Good Place turns upside down. We have bizarre weather conditions. It's literally raining rubbish, and there are oversized animals roaming the streets. Why? Because Eleanor's bad actions outweighed her good actions while she was on earth. And so now, because of her negative past, everybody, the whole neighborhood of The Good Place is suffering. Based upon the point system of The Good Place, Eleanor should be kicked out. She should be sent to the bad place. However, spoiler alert, she manages to convince her soulmate to help her to become good, to help her earn her place in the good place by doing good deeds. So Eleanor tries to change her eternal destiny by being good. And so whether it be carrying out acts of kindness to fight the coronavirus in real life, or earning our spot in the good place in the fiction of Netflix, it seems possible to be good without God. However, there is a fundamental flaw in The Good Place, in the world of The Good Place. So there may be a point system, but who decides how many points to award each action? Even in the imaginary world of The Good Place, someone is in charge and someone is deciding what's good and what's not. But why do they get to decide? Why not somebody else? And what if someone lives a privileged and wealthy life so that they're able to do more good than someone who lives in poverty and is just barely staying alive themselves, let alone helping others? In the same way, when we look more closely at our good deeds and acts of kindness being performed in a universe without God, we soon run into problems with morality. In his book, A River Out of Eden, Professor Richard Dawkins explains that in a universe of electrons and selfish genes, blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt. Other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. The universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. If the world we know and love today is the product of random cosmic activity, which doesn't have agency or moral codes, then from where do we get our sense of what is good or evil? If, as Dawkins claims, our world is made up of blind physical forces and pitiless indifference, then when Humanist UK champion change for a better society, their decision to do so and their definition of better are completely subjective. There would be no universal standard to judge or say why society should be better and how it should be better. Now, we may take it as a given that the idea of a better society or a better world means human flourishing. Most of us would agree with that. It's what the majority of us think, but has this always been the case? You see, if morality depends upon what the majority think is best for society, then it kind of raises questions about how moral progress is achieved. For example, would we say that someone like Mary Prince or someone like Frederick Douglass or William Wilberforce, Were they morally wrong to have campaigned for abolition when the majority said that slavery was best for society? Or what about Martin Luther King? Would we say that he was morally wrong to speak up against racial inequality when the majority felt that racial segregation was the best for society? I'm sure you'll agree that they weren't wrong to do so, and most of us agree that slavery and racism is wrong for all people across all places and times. But in a world without God, where is our sense of morality grounded? We could say that our ability to know what's right and what's wrong doesn't depend upon God. And we can do this by asking two questions. Question number one, are moral acts willed by God because they are good? Or number two, are moral acts good because they are willed by God? If the first one is true, then it means that moral values exist outside of God. So goodness is separate and apart from God. And if that's the case, we don't need God to know what is good. If the second question is true, then that good deeds are good because God chooses them, then, as Julian Begini asks, what is there to stop God from choosing torture, for instance, and thus making it good? The point is that God choosing good is completely arbitrary. Now, this is known as the Euthyphro dilemma, and it's often put forward to show that we don't need God to know what is right and what is wrong, that morality is self-evident, we just know. And this is a really key objection that the religious person needs to take seriously. But are these options the only two? According to Christianity, there is another option. God has revealed himself to us as goodness itself. As God, he's completely necessarily different to us. He's in a completely different category to us as humans. And that means his very nature, his being, his essence is good itself. And so we can rest assured in the fact that moral law is not grounded in the commands of God, but in the character of God. But even if we were to grant that objective morality exists in a world where God doesn't, there are still some questions that need answering. In a world where we're simply molecules dancing to the tune of natural selection, how and why did our minds grasp moral values? Most of us would agree that self-sacrifice is a virtue, but it's not an evolutionary advantage. For instance, Professor John Gray clarifies this point in his book, 7 Types of Atheism. He says that Darwin's theory of evolution says nothing about which morality anyone should adopt or whether they should be moral at all. And this returns us then to the whole idea of loving our neighbour. And it's a phrase that's taken out of the Bible, is often used in everyday speech as an example of how we should treat each other. But when we look at the scripture where this phrase comes from, we'll discover a far richer meaning. It's in St. Mark chapter 12, and Jesus is asked a question. He's asked what the greatest commandment is. And this question is a question about morality. And Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. The second is this, love your neighbour as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. So when we look closely, what we see is Jesus explaining how loving our neighbour should be linked to and hinged upon relationship with God. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying that people who follow other religions other than Christianity, or people who are spiritual but not religious, they don't conform to organised religion. I'm not saying that agnostics or atheists are not capable of good. That is not what I'm saying. In fact, my comments at the start of this talk demonstrate that regardless of religious background, we have seen on a global scale acts of kindness and acts of good. But what I am saying is that it is more likely for us to know and understand morality in a universe where God exists, where a personal, loving, intelligent, all-knowing and all-powerful agent sets their agenda for what is good, and not the unguided ambitions of selfish genes. Now, you don't have to believe in such a God to know objective moral truths, but it seems that such a God would need to exist in order for moral absolutes to exist. Jesus makes it clear to us that relationship with God transforms our hearts. It transforms our hearts so that we're able to love our neighbour. Unlike the point system of morality in the good place, where you earn your way to eternal bliss, good is not a place. Good is a person. Good is God. And St. John chapter 17 and verse 3, it shows us that life after death isn't primarily about a place, it's about relationship with God. Jesus is praying and he says, "Now this is eternal life, that they know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent." When we come to know God, the one who is completely good, what it does is give us a greater knowledge of ourselves, a more honest knowledge of who we really are. Because when we take a long, deep look into our hearts, we will see that we're all capable of good and evil. Our hearts are flawed. Why is it that in one moment we can celebrate the success of a friend who got a promotion at work, but in the very next minute we can turn our backs and gossip about them, thinking of every reason as to why they didn't deserve that post? Why is it that we can help our community in one moment, and in the next we're in the supermarket taking all of the toilet paper and leaving nothing for anyone else? Why is it that we can have a great night and spend an evening watching a movie with our family, but the very next day we're arguing and we're at each other's throats? All of this comes from the same heart. And the truth is, we can't really earn our way to the good place because our hearts are flawed. What we need is a person, not a place, someone outside of ourselves to rescue us from the ruin of our hearts. We need to be in relationship with a perfect God who loves us enough to have mercy and give us grace when we fail. Relationship with God is possible because he, not us, he has done what is necessary. He's done the ultimate good to save us from the brokenness of our hearts. In laying down his life for us on the cross and being raised again to defeat death and give hope, Jesus did the ultimate good. And so his sacrifice, his doing what's best in the interest of others, such as you and me, he did that. It's made it possible for us to have relationship with God. And that invitation is open to you today. You can accept what Jesus has done. We no longer need to exhaust ourselves with trying to earn points with a flawed heart. Our hearts can be transformed when we say yes to knowing God. This is eternal life, that they know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent. And if you're ready to make the decision today to be in relationship with God, then I invite you to say the simple prayer that's shown on the screen.